Welcome. Lisa Manterfield is the award-winning author of A Strange Companion and The Smallest Thing, and 2 works of nonfiction, and the critically acclaimed All Our Lies Are True. Originally from Northern England, she now lives in Northern California with her husband and 2 cats. When not writing, Lisa can be found hiking in the redwoods and daydreaming in her vegetable garden. Jennifer Lynn Alvarez received her Bachelor of Arts degree in English from the University of California at Berkeley. She is fascinated by the underdogs and power dynamics between groups of people. She is the author of 2 middle grade fantasy series, The Guardian Herd and Riders of the Realm, and 2 young adult standalone thrillers, Lies Like Wildfire and Friends Like These. Jen's books have been published in 7 countries and have received critical praise, award nominations, and international press for their themes on friendship, bullying, personal responsibility, and climate change. She currently lives in Middle Tennessee with her husband and her fair share of pets. And with that, I hand the microphone over to Jen.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Kathleen, for that introduction. It's so great to be here tonight. It's so great to see all these wonderful people out here to support Lisa and her amazing new novel. I had the pleasure of reading this novel, getting an early peek. I have it right here. I have the ARC. Absolutely loved it. Of course, I love thrillers, but this is so well done and so smart. Everything I expect from Lisa Manterfield. It's all here, just heart, family, thriller, all the thrillery aspects, the twists, the turns, the red herrings. You won't know what's going on, but you will be just turning the pages madly to figure out what happened. So it's super, it's a super fun read, and a very smart read, and very psychological as well. So I'm so excited to talk about this with Lisa tonight. So I'm going to kind of interview her, and then as we get toward the end, if you have questions, be kind of writing them down. Maybe I'll ask your question, but a question may come up, so kind of be writing them down, and at the end we'll get to your questions as well. So Lisa, the first I wanted to ask you just a quick little what this book is about. Well, why don't you tell us? I was going to read the back, but why don't you tell us a little bit what it's about and what inspired this story?
I will. Thank you. And thank you, both of you, for that great introduction and for the glowing review of the book. So this book is the story of Abby Kirkpatrick and her family. And Abby's twin sister vanished when they were 6 years old and was never found. And so the book opens with the police coming to the door with some possible news. And so what this story is a story about it's about family. It's about a family that's been through trauma. It's about trial by media. It's about family secrets. It's about the things that we do to protect the people we love. And as you say, it's very twisty and deep on the psychology, which is what I love to read and also what I love to write. And the inspiration for the book, actually, I think this is the only book I can say that this is where the idea came from. It actually came from a really dark, twisted dream that I had. It was actually about 20 years ago, and my mom and my stepfather were visiting, and I gave them my room to stay in, and my roommate was traveling for the holidays, so I was able to sleep in her room for the night. She's this incredible artist, and her room is just full of everything creative and books and toys and statues, and then she had this huge net above the bed full of rubber duckies. So it's just this amazing like museum, but made a big room very small. And so that night I had really one of the most vivid dreams I've ever had, and I can't tell you too much without giving it away, but in this dream I was looking out of the back window of a car and saw somebody from my family, not my real family, but in the dream it was somebody from my family doing something that they should not be doing. And it's one of those dreams where you wake up and it was like, oh, is that a memory or is that a dream? And I told my husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, he's like, you have to write that book. So that, that's not a story, that's just a spark of an idea, and it sort of percolated in the back of my head for almost 20 years until it finally started to form into a story.
Now, is this and I've read one of your other books. Is this your first thriller?
This is my first clearly defined thriller, but
Okay.
I always write sort of something with a mystery element, and definitely the psychological and the twisty deal with a lot of the same themes that you'll find in this book, which is family and trauma and grief and questions, really, secrets and questions, and trying to figure out what's really going on in the world.
Okay. All right. Well, you do that very, very well. So it's no surprise to me that you wrote a fully defined thriller here this time. So can you, there are siblings in this book that are very important to each other. There's the missing girl, Cassie, the main character, Abby, and then the older sister, Libby. And they're very interconnected, even though Cassie's no longer there. She's been missing since she was 6. Did you draw on, do you have siblings, and did you draw on, how did you come up with these relationships? Is it from personal experience?
I do have siblings, but I actually have brothers. And they're much older brothers. So I always like to joke that I grew up with 3 dads, because anytime as a teenager I wanted to do anything, I had to get through my dad and then 2 older protective brothers. So I think that sort of protective aspect that Abby feels in her life probably came from my own experience. But I think I find sisters really fascinating, probably because I don't have them. But I really, I watch friends who have sisters and watch that dynamic, and it's so interesting and so different to brothers. And it can be, so protective and so competitive sometimes as well, and overprotective sometimes. So I think sort of watching that dynamic play out with friends fed a lot into the dynamic between Abby and her sisters. And my mom was a twin as well. Abby and Cassie were twins. So my mom is a twin. So I've always sort of been fascinated with that sort of twinness, and they're fraternal twins, as Abby and Cassie were. So they're very, very different. And so I just find that really interesting in the ways that they're similar and the ways that they're different, and what it would be like to grow up with somebody exactly the same age as you. And so that dynamic plays out in the book a little as well. But I think family is just such a fascinating topic, I mean, we all have them, and they're interesting. The relationships and the dynamic is just so interesting, and especially when that protectiveness happens, and you see a different side of people.
Well, that is one of the questions, to talk about how the family secrets work in this, how they bind this family together, not necessarily always in a healthy way. And I think when it comes to family, it's kind of your first brainwashing experience, in a sense. It could be really good or really bad, but your family that's all they train you into belief systems and all kinds of things. And if they tell lies, or they keep secrets, I mean, it can be kind of systemic throughout the family. And it can be very damaging, and it can also be a wonderful sense of community where, a family really has a strong bond and identity as, like, we are the, Joneses or whatever, and they do everything together, they just have a strong sense of identity. But when there's those secrets and things, it can be, it can kind of bind them, but also destroy them at the same time. Do you want to talk about that?
All families have secrets, I think, at least the ones that I've come in contact with, and whether that's a not telling of the full story, or whether it's flat out lies to protect somebody in the family. And you're absolutely right. I mean, so much of our identity growing up comes from our family, and in Abby's case, she's lived a very sheltered life. So really her family has really, really influenced her. And one of the things that happens when Cassie goes missing is that the family moves away. And they because of the sort of trial by media and sort of the gossip in the neighborhood, and Abby's father was a suspect at first, and so they felt very alienated in the place that had been their friendly neighborhood, and so they moved to a very remote part of the country, and live in this, house on the edge of the moors, which is inspired by this old house near where I grew up that was sort of, in the middle of the nowhere. It's like, oh God, who would live in such a place? It's on the edge of the moors, and we all thought it was haunted and couldn't imagine what kind of person would live there. But that's where this family end up. And so I think, Abby was pulled out of school and lost touch with her friends. And so her view of the world has definitely been influenced completely by her family. And so as she meets this friend Georgie and sort of breaks out into the world again and starts uncovering some of these secrets, a big part of the story and a big part of something that I love to write about in my other books as well is this sense of identity. Like, who am I? Abby is in her 20s, but she is she's lived a very, very sheltered life. So she is a little bit sort of behind in her development in some ways, because she doesn't have the typical worldview of a 20-something. And so, that Abby learning who she is in the world as well is a really important part of the story. And I love writing about that. I love writing about that, breaking out of the family mold, if you like, to discover who you really are.
Yeah, well, and what's one of the observations you make that I thought was very astute was, okay, when it came to Georgie had neglectful parents and Abby had very protective parents. And you talked about or Abby noticed that like Georgie's thriving and Abby is not thriving. And so I thought that was kind of interesting because they tried to protect her, but they ended up making her sort of afraid. And then Georgie, who's kind of been neglected, is a little, more outgoing, a little bit braver, and she's thriving as a 20-year-old as a young lady in her 20s. And Abby really notices that difference. And it was interesting how it took kind of meeting this other friend and that's sort of what happens as we grow up and we meet other people, we start to see, oh, some things maybe don't quite add up with the way that, I was raised or whatever. So that was an astute observation.
Yeah, and I think that Georgie as well, as you said, she has kind of this guardian angel character, which is the friend of her brothers who kind of takes him under her wing, but he's a bit of a sketchy character, but still he is, he does keep an eye on her. But she's really, she's a woman that had no choice as a young woman but to figure it out how to be an adult and take care of herself, whereas Abby is the complete opposite and she's never been allowed to fall. She's never been allowed to make mistakes and sort of learn through her own trial and error how the world works. She's been very much protected, and I think I don't know, I think you see that out in the world, that kids that are overcuddled and overprotected, they never learn to fall and get back up on their own, whereas Georgie, she's had no option but to do that.
Yeah Now this is not a spoiler to say that the book opens with a body being found.
Yes.
And so Abby, and that's partly what is turning Abby a little bit reflective about her past and thinking about her future. Everything is related to what happened in the past. And when this body, Cassie is found, the investigation is reopened and the past is reopened. And And that's kind of how we start our story is with the body being found. So what sort of like criminal research, because the family then is talking to an inspector, they are back to the media, trial by media, they're cooperating with the police. What kind of criminal research did you do for this book? I always love hearing that.
Well, originally, the Inspector Siddiqui, actually had her own point of view in the book. So in an early draft, she had her own story and her own point of view chapters, which would have been kind of interesting. And she was sort of struggling with her own decisions as a mother of a teenage girl of how protective to be, which was sort of ran parallel with, you know, Abby's family story. But she, I think, without giving too much away, she never, it's not a detective story. You know, this is not a detective that is solving a crime. So it's really more about the psychology of the family left behind, rather than, you know, a typical crime novel where we're putting together forensic clues, or, you know, those kind of criminal clues. And so I didn't really have to do a lot of criminal research because I didn't need to get all of those details right, because they don't really play into the story. That's not what it's really about. The research I did was much more into the psychology and the psychology of trauma and of memory and of I guess sort of victim psychology as well, or you know, the family psychology of, you know, what it's like to be the person left behind after, you know, some kind of crime or tragedy. And that's the stuff that's really the most interesting to me.
And how did you do that research? Did you were you reading articles or watching documentaries, or where did you find that psychological research?
Yeah, I mean, some of it, you know, that you always have, and you know, I'm looking at your books right there, but you know, you always have that serendipitous moment where, you know, you're sitting in a doctor's office or whatever, and you pick up a magazine. I remember actually picking up a copy of Psychology Today, and, you know, you're flicking through looking for the articles, and there's one article that was like, that's the bit that makes it all come together. So, you know, some of that is serendipitous, and some of it is you know, Google and interviewing. And I love interviewing experts. I always used to be really sort of uncomfortable about bothering people, you know, with my silly questions, but it turns out that most people are really happy to talk about the work that they do, and they love it, and they love to pass on their knowledge. So I've had some really fun conversations with this book and my other books with experts in their various fields of sort of you know, digging into the possibilities and sort of solving plot problems with somebody who's not a writer but is an expert of the field in the field. So yeah, it's always fun.
That's yeah, I love interviewing people as well. It is really fun. Okay, so that's well, it really shows that research that you did, and even the criminal aspect does really come across very authentically. So you did a great job with that. I mean, it is in there, the scene where they're, you know, taking where the body was found, and then the media, the way the media handles it, it all feels very authentic.
Fortunately, that doesn't need a lot of research because we see
True.
that every day.
We do, sadly. Now Abby uses boxing as a way to unwind, and which I thought was really fun because we don't see a lot of female characters that box. So I loved it, and I was wondering what drew you to boxing as opposed to any other activities. Do you box, or where did that come from?
So I used to, actually, and people who know me will probably know that I'm like the biggest pacifist, non-violent person. But a number of years ago, I did take a kickboxing class and discovered like it's great therapy. It's really great therapy. So and then since, you know, when I started writing the book, did more research about that and sort of somatic therapy and this mind-body connection. So it just seemed like a really great sort of outlet for Abby, because she really doesn't have anybody else to talk to. You know, she can't talk to her family about what's going on. They don't want to sort of crack open their grief again, or answer questions. Really, you know, they're very, very private people, and so this is just a real physical outlet for her. So it's kind of fun. I miss boxing.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's fun. It's a fun part of the story. So craft question. For when you wrote this novel, how did you plot this out? Because you've got twists, you've got red herrings, you have, you know, everything that a thriller is supposed to have, and it was your, you know, first official thriller, although you've done mystery and all that, but it's all there, the things you might expect. How is it different than writing other books, and how did you plot it out?
Yeah, it's really different, and I think it was a bit of trial and error. And this book, you know, it's been sort of rolling around in my head for a long time. And actually, when I first wrote it, I wrote it as a screenplay, which did not work for me at all. But you know, it was an interesting experiment. But it had a very different ending, which did not work at all. But that spark of the ending sort of was what that gave me, was really actually the red herring. So yeah, I mean, I think that I think I'm changing the way I might write, because I tend to write and find the story. And it's not a very and I know that you're a big outliner, and you know, you like to. Oh, you're not? I thought you were. Okay, I apologize for accusing you.
No, yeah, I would love to be a good outliner. I would love that. That would make life, I think it would make life easier. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. I mean, because I wrote, as I always do in my books, I wrote many drafts, and actually, you know, the who did it part wasn't always in place. It was different outcome, shall we say. But once I figured that out, then really you have to write backwards. You have to start with the ending and then feed in those clues and feed in those red herrings. And I was just reading a piece that I was planning to read tonight, and you know, even as I'm reading it, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember I planted that little seed there all the way in, you know, sort of page 14. That I know is going to pay off later. But it's definitely, once you know where you're going, then you have to sort of turn around and retrace your steps and sort of feed your breadcrumbs in backwards. It's fun. I mean, it's kind of devious, because you know you're deceiving readers. And so it's like, ooh, I know.
They are fun to write, and I agree, because I always say I write them forwards, backwards, and then forwards again. Yeah, and I find that they're hard to plot. I don't know, I have to feel my way through and write lots of drafts. But did you want to do a short reading for us?
Sure, I'd love to. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Let me have a quick sip of water though.
Okay.
So I don't think there's much that you need to know to set this up. It's pretty early in the book. But you said that, you know, it's been 16 years since Cassie disappeared. The police have come to the door. They have found remains, but they're at this point not really sure who, you know, they're not really sure, but it's possibility, because they were found in the area not too far from where Cassie went missing. So this is chapter 3, and this is the introduction of the older sister, Libby. Okay. Just before noon the following morning, a black taxi rumbled up our driveway. Keys jangled in the front door, and seconds later, a streak of teal tore into the kitchen. Christ almighty, said Libby, straightening her suit. There's a reporter outside the gate. Where's Dad? He went out, I said. He didn't say where, just that he wouldn't be long. What are you doing here? Libby parked her rolling suitcase and carry-on bag beside the table and surveyed the kitchen, looking at everything in it except me. I was summoned. For what? Libby looked at me like I was the biggest idiot she'd ever met. Because of Cassie? Every single thing we do will be watched and noted. We need to show a united front. She said show, not be. She didn't say she'd come home so we could be together, so we could cry and hug together, so we could finally mourn Cassie together. That wasn't Libby's way. She'd come home to make sure everything looked normal to the outside world, to tell me what was best for me, when what she meant was that it would be best for her. "How was your flight?" I asked, trying for some sort of normal conversation. "Fairly typical," said Libby. "2 terrified flyers in first, 3 screaming babies in economy, and another lost passport, all in a day's work." She gave me a polished smile. I didn't think any of that sounded very typical, but that was Libby. She'd been trained to appear calm under pressure, to soothe nervous passengers and solve problems discreetly, all the while giving the appearance that everything was under control. Nothing ever fazed Libby. Not a frantic passenger with no documentation, not even the discovery of her little sister's remains. "I hope it's her," I said. Libby turned on me. "What?" "I hope it's Cassie. At least we'll know." A look flashed across Libby's face. Fear? But then it was gone. "Yes," she said, her mask of briskness returning. "We'll know, and before we know it, everyone else will know too." The shard of Libby's bitterness always stung. But she was right. About a week after Cassie's disappearance, the police had taken Dad in for questioning. No official arrest was made, but the news reported that Robert Kirkpatrick was helping police with their inquiries. It may as well have been a conviction. All the support we received from friends in our old neighborhood stopped. No one brought over dinners or offered to take me or Libby for play dates. All of a sudden, our tragedy became something we had brought on ourselves. My parents, and more specifically my dad, were presumed guilty, and the fact that they had suffered the loss of a child was suddenly forgotten. The media had camped out in front of the house and hounded my dad about his involvement. Even after the police released a statement that he was no longer a person of interest, the suspicions surrounding him never went away. The dark mark it left on the killer Kirkpatricks was the reason we had been forced to move away, the reason I had grown up in a strange, isolated world. So that's the introduction to Libby, who was a really fun character to write because she's kind of terrible.
Yeah. She is. But I love that she's a flight attendant, because I have a friend who's a flight attendant, and it's so true about being calm under pressure. So it's kind of interesting how she found a job like that, and she also had that in her personal life. She wants to keep everything looking okay.
Yeah.
We're
And the other
not
thing
crashing.
with Libby is, she's the one that got away. So this being a flight attendant is literally her escape from the family as far away as she possibly can. So, there's that difference there between the two sisters as well, which is always fun.
Oh yeah. Yes. So that brings me to the question about grief, because you really I feel like when I read the book, I could almost believe you had gone through this yourself, because and I wrote the question out about how you talked about how people die 3 deaths, or how a person dies 3 deaths when they're missing. And it was that just the experience of grieving for a missing person who hasn't been found for all these years, 16 years. And obviously she was 6, she's not off on her own, to grieve a missing person is so different than when you know what happened to them. And I thought you did an amazing job. And can you talk about that? Was that research, or how did you dial into that?
Yeah, thankfully that wasn't from personal experience, but I just think that that lack of closure, I could just imagine what when you lose someone, there's that point where you get to say goodbye, and then from that point forward you sort of start healing, and however long that takes, you at least have a point that you can move from. And I just think when that doesn't happen, you never get that point. It just feels like that process would be so much longer and more drawn out. So yeah, I think I probably spend an unhealthy amount of time thinking about grief, but it's such a universal topic. It's such a universal topic, and the way we grieve is everybody grieves differently. And as awful as this sounds, it's great grist for the writing mill. But and some of the book is, I mean, obviously the story itself is not written from, or maybe not obviously, it's not written from my experience. I mean, this is not the story of my family at all, thank goodness. But there are elements in there of, you know, my own experiences. And I think, honestly, I did have I had a childhood friend who went through not exactly this experience, but a, you know, sort of similar traumatic experience. And they just kind of disappeared overnight. You know, they were, the children were sort of whipped away off the scene and sent to live with relatives. And so you know, there was just that, I mean, for I was pretty young, maybe 8 or so at the time, but just to have like that loss of a friend, that friend didn't die, but they were just gone. And there was no chance to say goodbye. And so that's always something that's kind of stuck with me. So I think, I mean, you know, when you write, you make up a story, but you pull in your own,
Of course,
sort of world experience, and just observing other people's experiences too. And I think I've always been that person that's, you know, watch the news and always thought about the families left behind. You know, like what would it be like to be in that situation? And so, you know, as a fiction writer, that's grist for the mill.
Yeah, and we are lucky that we get to write about what we don't know. You know, we get to imagine. That is one of the greatest things about writing, is imagining what something might be like. And for all the grief in there, I have to reiterate, it's not sad in a way. I mean, it's sad what happened, but the experience of reading the book is not heavy. It is lightning fast. It is exciting. You are turning pages. You have to know what happened. So, but it's touching at the same time. You feel like it's real, I guess, because Lisa did such a great job. So it feels real, but at the same time, you can't wait to find out what happens. So it is a very, quick. It was a very quick read, very, very quick read. So, but the characters felt real. So it's kind of the perfect thing it's perfect thriller that way, because you care. Now I have just a couple more questions before we open this up. So be thinking of your own questions, everyone. I wanted to know how you came up with the title. All Our Lies Are True. It's a great title.
Yeah, this is not the first title. And I think in the piece I just read, I mentioned the Killer Kirkpatricks, which is what the media dubs the family in the first round of investigation. And so that was a title for a while, but I thought that was a little too ominous. And so I had another title as well, which fit well, but it was a title that had been used elsewhere, and I think was also a TV show. And so I mean, I was just thinking about this idea of truth and lies, and I mean I don't want to say too much and give away the plot.
Okay.
But I mean, the whole book is based on the truths that we tell ourselves to survive, and the lies that we tell ourselves to survive, and that crossover point between what's truth and what is fabricated. And so I like this title.
Yeah, I love it. I love the title, the cover, everything. It's a beautiful book. It just works really, really well. I have one last question before we take everyone else's. Can you tell us what you are working on next?
I can. Yeah, I have another thriller in the works, and this. Yeah, I know. I don't. And this is about a woman who starts to believe that her dead husband might actually still be alive. So that's all I'm going to say about that.
I like it.
But so that book's with my agent at the moment, and I am very patiently waiting for notes back from her. So I'm trying not to think about that at all. So but you know, as always, in the gaps between books are all these ideas that just sort of sit in the back of your head quietly waiting for their turn, are sort starting to rumble about a bit. So it'll be, I don't know what it'll be next, actually. I've got a few different ideas rumbling around, and you know, some of those sort of seeds of ideas that sit with you for ages, they're just percolating away, trying to figure out what they want to be. And I have a work in progress, which is actually a historical novel set in the Second World War that I'm still trying to figure out what exactly that book wants to be. So there are things brewing.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited about that one with your agent, because if you do grief so well, and it's like you've done missing person, now what is it like to grieve someone and then have them return or possibly return? That's a whole nother thing. So I put you to bed. Why are you up?
yeah, that's actually that's been really fun to write as well. And again, you know, planting the clues, working forwards, getting it all wrong, going backwards,
right,
planting the clues.
Yeah, I think thrillers are written at least 3 times, you know, it seems like.
Yeah, I wish it was only 3, but
at least, yeah, just to get started 3 times.
Started.
Yeah. Well, I think we have questions here, and I think
Great.
Kathleen, were you going to take over the questions?
Yep. Can
Okay.
you hear me all right? I unmuted myself, and hopefully you can hear through. Yeah, we're getting some great questions come in, so everyone please feel free to keep adding. Before we jump to that though, Lisa, will you show off your necklace and tell us the story behind your necklace?
I will. So just lean in. I don't know if you can see without me sticking my nose in the screen, but this is it's not completely the cover of the book, but it's the background of the cover of the book. And I found this amazing artist on Etsy who paints hand-painted landscapes on pendants, and I sent her a copy of the book and said, is there any way that you could replicate this and take out the title? And she did. So this is my Erie Lake, not Lake Erie, but Erie Lake pendant that when you read the book you'll understand the significance of the Erie Lake.
Lovely. So cool. I love that you did that and honor your book with a special piece of jewelry to show it off, that you know, people don't necessarily know looking at it, but I think that's fun that we all can kind of be in on that secret. Super cool. Okay, we've got some great questions here. So I've got and a lot of them are about the writing process, which I think is really fun. So let's do this one.
Sorry, Kathleen. Sorry, can we remind everyone about the giveaway, just so that they know that
there is a giveaway coming. 2 people are going to be randomly selected, and we will do that as soon as we finish the Q&A in a few minutes.
Right, and they have to be present to win, correct?
Or
no?
Oh, they do have to be present to win. Okay, then.
Just wanted to make sure people knew that in case they have to jump off, that just stay on a little bit longer.
Stay on a little bit longer. Okay.
Sorry. Thank you.
No problem. No problem. Okay, here's one, Lisa. You can probably, I think it'll make you smile. How long did it take you to write the first draft, and how many revisions did you do?
Well, this one's an easy one to remember because I started this book in 2017 as a NaNoWriMo. And for the non-writers or people who don't know, that's National Novel Writing Month, which is a challenge to write a 50,000 word draft of a novel in the month of November. So I actually did this with a writer friend of mine, Terry Case, and we started doing this actually, it's still out all there because once you put something on the internet, it never goes away. But we did NaNoWriMo together, and we started posting our favorite lines from the day to Instagram. So if you go all the way back to November of 2017 on my Instagram feed, you'll see little images of my favorite line that I wrote for the day. And then we actually got a couple of, I don't know, a week or 2 into it, and suddenly figured out that we might actually be writing the same book. So we stopped. It was the strangest thing. We had this confab about it and realized, oh no, they're completely different books. But it was kind of eerie to see the similarities. So so that was my first draft in 2017, which was, well, yeah, nothing that anybody would ever have read. And so I revised between 2017 and then 2019, which is when 2019, and then so the book went off on its journey through COVID, as many books did, and then that's that. So I mean, there was some actual, some smaller revisions after that and copy edits, but as far as having this version of the book, then about 2 years.
Okay.
Which is much quicker than the other books that I've written. So hey, we're getting faster.
On that note, how do you keep focus on a project? Do you do one project at a time? Do you switch back and forth?
Well, if I was smart, I'd do one project at a time. But that's not true. So Jen can speak to how we stay focused. Jen and I are part of a morning Zoom writers group, and we meet at 7 o'clock in the morning, my time. The people further east have a slightly easier time of it, but I'm on at 7, and we it's just quiet writing. We get on Zoom, we turn off our microphones, we just wave and get to work. So having that structured time every day for writing is really, really crucial. And I'm sorry, there was another part to the question.
Just how do you stay focused? Do you stay focused on one project? And I guess my follow-up question is then, how do you discipline yourself to see if you've got multiple projects going? How do you see that one through to the end?
Yeah, I mean, I've usually got a main project and something that's like boiling away in the background. So whether that's, just sort of piecing together ideas, I do sort of vision boards sometimes for the story. So that might be just collecting images, maybe my characters, or doing writing prompts, or just journaling about it. There was actually the year that I can't remember when that was, but the year that I was doing my major revisions on this book, I was actually writing a second book at the same time. So I would work on this in the morning and do my edits, and then I would have lunch, and then I would sit out in my backyard in my Adirondack and write a first draft of a second book. I don't recommend that, but it was a fun and productive summer.
Okay. How do you deal with the order of reveals in your story? When you know the end, how do you keep the reader, how do you keep us guessing and the tension high? Are there any techniques, any tricks?
Yeah, and I'm gonna give a half answer, and I'm gonna throw this out to Jen as well, because Jen has actually written several thrillers and is really good at this. And I think for me, it's a matter of writing and revising, and sort of doing a high level, here's the character's journey, but here's like the reader's journey. Like what does the reader know at each point, and what does the character know, and what do I know? And so feeding that in. So I mean, you sort of have to make a decision about what kind of book you're writing. Does the reader know before the character knows? Because that lends itself to a certain kind of tension, or is the reader finding out as the character finds out? That's a different kind of tension. So you sort of have to make that decision first, I think. And then, yeah, definitely just trying to map out for me, like, what does the reader believe? So I sort of am laying a trail towards a red herring where the reader thinks, I know who did it. And then, I'm doing a switch so that I think, oh, but maybe that's what happened. And so then you're sort of going back and feeding in those little crumbs of information.
You do that very well as someone who has read the book. You had me guessing.
Thanks. Jen, do you want to speak to that too?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first draft, you have to know everything, right? The author has to know everything, the first couple drafts, and then you advocate for the reader on your revisions. It's all about the reader at some point. So for me, first, I have to know everything. I really have to get that ending nailed down, and then I can go and start kind of taking things out so that the reader learns them along the way. There's also the whole unreliable narrator. You can use that also as it's another plot device. In Lies Like Wildfire, I like what you said, Lisa, about sometimes the reader knows more than the characters. And I open that with just a brief, you see that one of the characters is looking for her best friend's body. And then you go back 6 weeks and we watch, how, so when we go back in time and you see, which girl goes missing, but that's all you don't know how or why. And then we work up to that point, which is the midpoint. And then we go forward to try to figure out what happened to her. And so, there's a lot of different ways you kind of have to decide, like Lisa said, what kind of book you want. Do you want the reader completely in the dark? Do you want them to have a smidgen of information just to kind of keep them excited for the big, it's almost like a little prologue, but for me, it was a chapter 1 to keep them kind of invested. Okay, I got to really watch these friends close because this girl's going to go missing and I want to know why. So all along you're looking at behavior and you're wondering if one of the friends was involved. And so anyway, then you really are engaging that reader's mind. But other times you're just taking them on a thorough ride. They're in the dark too. So it's very, like Lisa said, it's very fun to manipulate the reader and play with the reader. And, but first the key is you have to know everything and then you can start revising. Really all revisions are for the reader.
Oh my gosh, this is so interesting to both of you. It's so fun to see inside your brains and your imaginations and your creativity. Lisa, back to the story. This is a fun question about the location. Did you always know that the atmosphere of the moors was the ideal location for your story, or did you have other locations as you were putting together the details of this particular story?
Yeah, I think the very first way I imagined the book is actually set in the UK. And when I originally imagined it, I actually set it in the US. It was a very, very different story. But then once I, started reimagining the story and putting things into place, that, yeah, I mean, the sort of the moors in the north of England are very close to where I grew up. And there's, there's so much great fiction with moors as a backdrop from, Sherlock Holmes and Wuthering Heights. And there's something very sort of dark. And I mean, when you go in there in the daytime, it's beautiful. One of the most beautiful places you could go, in my opinion. But there's, after dark, there's an eeriness. And I mentioned earlier this haunted house that near where I grew up that was built just on the edge of the moors. And now it's been renovated. It's a beautiful house, but it's in the middle of nowhere. So yeah, I love that sort of dark, moody setting, and it fit the story. It fit the story perfectly.
Everybody, I'm putting Lisa and Jen's websites in the chat again. So if you have follow-up questions for them, you feel free to reach out. Feel free to follow them on the different social media. If you have more questions, I am kind of keeping an eye on the time. So I think I'll ask one more question. Jen asked, what are you working on next? And so someone asked, what is your method for figuring out what you're going to write next? And the way it was posed, do you actually have a hat with a bunch of different brainstorms and ideas and you draw the next one, or what is sort of your process for the next project?
Yeah, it's not quite as random as that. I do have an idea teapot, actually, which is this great teapot that a friend bought me. And if I have ideas, I just scribble it on a piece of paper and throw it in there. And then, when it's time, I can sort of pull it all out. But what I find is that the ideas that are, the good ideas stick. I have probably about a half a dozen, I'm going to call them sparks right now, because they're really not fully formed ideas. And I'm with the next book, I'm trying to be a bit more intentional about it, and really try and flesh the ideas out more. But what usually happens is it's the hot idea. It's the one that just won't leave you alone. It's the one that you keep thinking about. And even when you're working on other books, is this I have one idea right now, and all I have is a setting, a place, and an era. I have a backdrop of what's happening in the world, and I have 2 characters, and I have no story, but this little setup, it won't leave me alone. It won't leave me alone. So at some point, I think probably when the other books moved on down the line, I'm going to sit with that and figure out, all right, what is this story? Like, mess around with these characters, let them talk to me a bit. Let me figure out what's going on in the world and where the story is for that. But yeah, it's definitely, it's the ideas that have the heat and that just you wake up thinking about.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you. These have been such great questions, everyone. Thank you. So fun to hear from both of you. Again, if you have follow-up questions for either of these wonderful authors, I encourage you to get in touch with them directly. And at this time, I'm going to announce the giveaway. Tonight, both of our authors are giving away one signed paper book, Lisa Manterfield's All Our Lies Are True, and a signed paperback of Jennifer Lynn Alvarez's Friends Like These. I know she had it right next to her on her table. There it is. Great books. So fun. And our lucky winners tonight for Lisa's book is Lynn Rankin Esquire. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And for Jen's book, Rosa Easton. So the authors will be in touch with you both to get your contact information and follow up with you there. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Again, congratulations to Lisa on this wonderful release, this outstanding book. I am so excited for everybody in the world to get a chance to read this. You will find these authors' books anywhere great books are sold. We encourage you to support your local independent bookshop. And with that, again, a big thank you, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.
And I would just like to say a big thank you to everyone for coming, and also thank you to Jen for coming up with such great questions, and to Kathleen for hosting and keeping everything running. And thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thanks, everyone. It's fun. Great questions from everybody.
Thank
I don't
you.
know. Can you hear me? I'm speaking, Lynn, the one that got the book.
Yes. Hi.
I have a copy already. I got an advanced copy. So if somebody else would like one, I'd love for somebody else to get a copy because it's so, so good.
Lisa, what would you like to do?
Well, do you want to draw somebody else, or Lynn, if you want to give it as a gift, that's fine too.
Whatever. I mean, I'll do whatever you'd like. If it's easy for me to give it, I will. But if people here, since everybody, the people that came are probably even more excited to read it now, I'd be happy for you to pick somebody else.
Someone's suggesting you give it as gift, although I also want, you said you got an advanced copy. This is a signed official paperback. Maybe you should give your advanced copy away.
I have a signed copy. I got
okay.
with Lisa last week. But that makes it even more impressive. I'd be happy to pass it on too. So
let's do that.
Lynn, I will send you an email and we will figure this out.
Okay.
But thank you.
All right. I'm going to stop the recording.